McQuestion, for over 28 years talking about things that matter with people who care. Production of McQuestion is made possible in part by individual viewers, supporters of the Foundation for Responsible Television, the University of Texas at Dallas, creating the future.
You know, in the last few years, Russia has reasserted itself on the world stage in the Ukraine, Syria, the Crimea, and in its relationship with China. Joining us again are two experts on Russia and our co-host, Jim Falk, CEO of the World Affairs Council of Dallas-Fort Worth. Jim, why don't you introduce our guest?
Thank you very much. Robert Donaldson is Trustees Professor of Political Science, Emeritus at the University of Tulsa. That's the same university where he served as president from 1990 to 1996. He's a member of the Council on Foreign Relations and an author of 6 books and numerous articles on the politics and foreign policy of the USSR and Russia. Your most recent book is The Foreign Policy of Russia, Changing Systems, Enduring Interest. Looking forward to our discussion.
Thank you.
David Oualaalou. He's a founder of Global Perspectives Consulting, headquartered here in Dallas, Texas, a military veteran. David is also the author of several books, including his most recent, Beneath the Veil, Fall of the House of Saud. His forthcoming book, The Russian Roulette, Russia's Infiltration of American Society, will be available next year. Good to have you with us as well.
Pleasure to be with you.
So, David, for nearly 3 decades, Russia had really been basically removed from the Middle East. And with the advent of the Syrian civil war, Russia now has a major presence. How did that happen, and how damaging is it to U.S. interest?
Isn't that interesting about how geopolitics works? Whoever thought that the Russians will be deciding what's taking place right now in the Middle East? And of course, we have to go back, historically speaking, as to what led to that. Well, we can just go back to the invasion of Iraq that paved the way for Russia to start to think in terms of, okay, if the U.S. is going to be entangled in the Middle East, draining its resources, and that will pave the way for us to start to think in terms of how we can embark on an aggressive foreign policy, mainly in the Middle East. But the key factor to that, Jim, has to do with the Iran nuclear agreement. As you know, Russia was behind Iran to come to the table and agree to the terms with the P5+1. There was Russia behind it because Russia understood ahead of time that if they support Iran in this endeavor, they will reap the fruit of their labor later on. And that will be in terms of maybe entering into a strategic alliance with Iran, maybe establishing a permanent basis in Syria, which is what Russia did. Those are paved the way for Russia to embark on its policy in the Middle East.
What are Russia's critical foreign national security interests in the Middle East?
Well, in the Middle East, to ensure that the balance of power tilted back to what it was before. In other words, reestablishment of Russia, a sphere of influence in Syria, in Libya, ensure that Yemen does not fall into the hands of, for example, in support of Saudi Arabia, of the United States, and also ensure that Turkey now, that purchased the Russian weapons, Turkey that is a NATO ally, going with what Russia is suggesting. So
I'm glad you brought that up, because the United States basically has the monopoly on arms sales to the Middle East. Are you seeing a shift in that? And specifically, what about the United Arab Emirates and Saudi Arabia?
Well, you don't see a shift for that from the United States with those two clients, Saudi Arabia and United Arab Emirates. They're still purchasing.
That's solid.
That's solid. Where you see the shift now is between, for example, Iran, Turkey, and even Syria, of course. For Iran and Syria, they were clients of Russia. But now you're talking about advanced system being sold to those countries.
I'm sure we'll come back to the Middle East in a few minutes, but Bob, I want to ask you about an article that I saw this morning concerning Venezuela. It was produced by Stratfor, the Austin-based risk analysis company, and the title of it is Russia Throwing Its Lot In with Maduro in Venezuela?
Well, I don't think there's any doubt that Russia has thrown its lot in there. And this is another one of those cases where Mr. Putin is on the world stage trying to make Russia great again, if you will, and he sees obviously the Western Hemisphere, the Monroe Doctrine, kind of a sphere of interest of the United States. the United States denied Russia's effort to claim a sphere of influence in the former Soviet states, and so he's giving us back a little bit of that. Well, if you keep us out of our sphere and you interfere there, we're going to interfere in your sphere. But the other part of it, of course, is that Mr. Putin has made quite a fetish of opposing American efforts at regime change. I don't think he has any particular love for Maduro, and I don't think he has any particular thought that Maduro is necessarily governing Venezuela wisely or well. But I think he is absolutely opposed to the notion that foreign powers should overturn regimes, having, of course, his own regime in mind in part.
And that was one of the roots of the problem with Hillary Clinton, wasn't it?
Absolutely. Hillary Clinton was seen as a proponent of that kind of infiltration and regime change. And when they had the demonstrations in Moscow in 2011, Putin said she gave the signal, and they revolted.
Well, it's interesting because, Jim, you obviously in the last couple of months have had the opportunity to interview former Ambassador Mike McCaul and also former Secretary of State Madeleine Albright. I want to play a clip from one of your interviews with Madeleine Albright when you talked about foreign policy. So if you're ready for clip number 10, let's hear what Madeleine had to say.
The economy of Russia is certainly not doing well. An awful lot depends on oil prices and a variety of things. By the way, one of the things that I think is important to say, I don't think we won the Cold War. I think they lost it, and that's not just language, but a real thing. Because what happened was that communism doesn't work. It collapsed. The economic parts of it didn't work, and he has not put it back together in any shape or form. And so the economic situation, whenever I read about Russia, their growth rate is down. They really are not doing well. So what he is doing is working off of that man who's embarrassed and making Russia great again. And so I think that that is one of the things that he is kind of plugged into, that nationalist aspect, and then showing that Russia, by the way, has reintroduced itself into a position of power in the Middle East, and has pushed not just what they did in Georgia, but also in Ukraine, and some of the threatening things that they've been doing against the Baltic states. So I think that is what he's doing, and he is plugged into that nationalist theme in a way that keeps him in power, because the people are not doing that well.
Yeah, and I think that she talks about this foreign policy and making Russia great again. As you mentioned a minute ago, Bob, we have a president who's trying to make America great again as well. But the personalities play on this world stage, and most people are very critical of our president. We're typically fairly critical of President Putin. About 10 years ago, I interviewed a guy named Herb Meyer, who was in the Reagan administration and helped figure out with the national security apparatus that Russia was really economically extremely weak then, kind of like Ms. Albright said right there. So I want to take you to that clip with Herb Meyer when he's asked by one of our friends and audience members about what Putin's like. Is he a Stalin and all that sort of thing? So you'll hear Herb Meyer's, let's say, very strong opinion about Putin and what's happening in Russia. So if you're ready for clip 10, let's play it, please.
Is Putin Stalin with a human face?
Is he Stalin with a human face?
Yes.
Probably worse, yeah. Like everybody else, we hoped he was, a bit of a thug, but maybe a modern thug, and he's looking like a total creep. He is driving Russia into the same